Commissioner Drobish.
Here.
Commissioner Friend.
Here.
Commissioner Lowry.
Here.
George, is it Lowry? Yes. My apologies. I haven't been to a meeting since you were here. Vice Chair Russell.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Briggs is noted as absent.
We'll entertain the adoption of the consent calendar and the agenda and the minutes.
Motion to adopt.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 There were no items removed from the consent calendar. This is a time for the public, if they have to give them an opportunity. I'm not going to read the whole paragraph, but we don't want any slanderous or libelous comments. We want comments that would be germane to the business of the Planning Commission. And you're limited to 3 minutes. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak tonight? Hearing none, we'll move on. Communications?
There are no communications.
Okay, thank you. Now is the time for the public hearings. The first item is a change of use at 3097 Cedar Ravine Road. And I believe Mr. Painter has the staff report.
Yes, I do. Thank you. The site is owned by Michael Sheehan, and he is requesting the conversion of an existing office that was conditionally approved for a nonprofit office in 1991 under a conditional use permit 1991-06 and site plan review 1991-11. The conversion would bring it back to its former and original single-family residential use. The conversion would result in a discontinuance of the use permit. There are no exterior alterations proposed with the request. The site's located at 3097 Cedar Ravine Road. It's approximately 50 feet south of the intersection of Victor Lane and Cedar Ravine Road. The lot size is 5,100 square feet, or approximately 0.12 acres. The site has a general plan land use designation of high-density residential with a corresponding zoning of R3H, and the R3 stands for multifamily residential, and the H is the historic district designation. The maximum density in the R3 zone is 12 dwelling units to the acre. Adjacent to the project site are, to the north and to the east, are parcels that are zoned R3. They contain both single and multifamily residential uses. Parcels to the south and southeast contain medical and professional office uses and are zoned BP, or business professional. To the west are a variety of uses including single family, multifamily, as well as professional offices. Improvements on the subject site is one approximately 1,000 square foot detached single-story structure containing 4 rooms and a bathroom. Assessor records indicate the structure was built in 1931 as a single-family residence. A single-car access driveway serves a parking area to the rear of the site. The site is also located within the Cedar Ravine Historic District. Staff's review of the city's historic resource inventory revealed that this particular location is not a resource that's listed on that inventory, nor is it on the state or federal register of historic resources. And back in 1991, the owner of the property was Snowline Hospice. They came before a somewhat different planning commission at the time, and they received and applied for a conditional use permit and site plan review approval to convert the single family residence into an office use for nonprofit organization uses. Both the CUP and SPR site plan review was granted. The permission also allowed for the removal of a detached 2-car garage that was located to the rear of the property. Both the conversion and garage removal were completed and inspected in 1994. In 2000, the property was purchased by Eldorado Community Foundation from Marshall Hospital to use as a professional office. The Community Foundation utilized the site for their office until 2012, when they put the property up for sale, and the Community Foundation relocated to a building on Main Street at 312 Main. They're putting this property up for sale. Mr. Sheehan acquired the property for the purpose of his primary residence. In terms of the zoning code, whenever there's a change of occupancy, in this case it involves an office use to residential use, it does require site plan review under section 1049 of the city's zoning ordinance. And to legitimize the conversion of this building from office use back to residential use, both the owner and their agent request approval of a major change to the site plan review from 1991 and the discontinuance of the use permit also from 1991. Because the project's located within a residential historic district, this project did and was presented to the Historical Advisory Committee on April 18th. There are 2 members of that committee in the audience this evening. The committee moved forward a unanimous recommendation that the Planning Commission approve the request. And this evening, our members members Harkey and Hardy are here in the audience this evening. In terms of staff's review of the project, we did look at the consistency with the general plan as well as the zoning ordinance. Staff did find a relevant goal and policy within the housing element. Under Goal E, it states that to preserve the existing housing stock. Policy 4 of Goal E states the city will continue to preserve historic structures within the city by encouraging reuse of viable buildings within historic districts. Although this, as I mentioned earlier, this structure is not on the city, state, or federal Register of Historic Resources. It was built in 1931 as a single-family dwelling, and the conversion of this 82-year-old structure back to its original purpose appears consistent with the goal and policy I've just quoted for you. In terms of zoning ordinance consistency, under the the conditional use permit section, which is 1036, the Planning Commission, when they conditionally approved this request, it converted the entirety of the building to an office use. Once again, this request tonight is to convert it entirely back to its single-family historic use on the site. This action, when it's completed, would formally discontinue that office use, and CUP 1991 would no longer be in effect. Now, if the property owner wanted to reestablish this after the Planning Commission's action this evening, assuming that it would approve this request, that the property owner would have to come back before you at some future time with a new application for an office use at this location. The R3 zone does permit an office use in an R3 zone with a conditional use permit. Now, under another section of City Code, in this case, the zoning designation, which is R3, there are some characteristics on the site which would make it difficult, if not impossible, to establish an additional multifamily dwelling unit. Those 2 characteristics are parcel area, in that this parcel is substantially less than the minimum required under the zoning if it was established today. It, of course, is a legal lot and can continue its legality. However, the establishment of another dwelling unit on this property for multifamily uses would not be permitted, in that there is insufficient area to do so. And staff has provided some analysis on page 5 which goes through that for you. In addition, parcel width would appear to also be a constraint. This particular lot has a parcel width of approximately 45 feet. That is substantially less than the 60-foot minimum width that would normally be required under this particular zone. And that constraint could limit and would likely limit the location placement of a secondary unit, as well as its required parking and landscaping. As I mentioned earlier, the historic characteristics of the site, again, the structure was built in 1931 as a single-family home. For over 60 years, it was occupied as such until the 1990s, when it was converted to an office use. Staff, therefore, has analyzed and has made it a finding that the physical constraints would hinder the conversion of the building back, or would not hinder, excuse me, the conversion of the building back to its original use, as when it was originally converted, it did not alter substantially the living, sleeping, eating, cooking, or sanitation areas within that building, which would be required under the building code for a dwelling unit. Those were not substantially altered and therefore can be converted from an office use to residential. In terms of environmental analysis, staff has determined that this project is a Class 3 exemption from the California Environmental Quality Act per Section 15303A, in that the request consists of the conversion of an existing small office structure to a single-family residence where no modifications are made to the exterior. Now, due to the constraints described in the staff report, and I briefly went over them in my oral report, which would limit the construction of an additional multifamily unit on this site, staff therefore believes that the allowance and permission of allowing for a single-family dwelling in this multiple family zone would be consistent with not only the general plan, but the zoning ordinance when the Planning Commission makes the required findings of fact, which staff has provided for you on page 6. Staff therefore recommends the Planning Commission make those findings, approve the request subject to conditions 1 through 4 on page 7. The applicant's agent is in the audience this evening, and that concludes my staff report.
Thank you. Before we go to the public hearing, are there any questions from the commission?
Actually, I have a question or two. This actually got by me in my original reading. This section 10-5-10R3, is that the section that about a year ago or so we changed the usage on in terms from by right to permitted use?
Correct. Not only that district, but also the R2 and the R4 zone.
Right, okay.
Specifically requiring the Planning Commission to make findings that there are circumstances that a lot would have to have in order to have a single-family dwelling there.
Okay, so just so I'm clear on this, at the time the CUP was granted back in 1991, it was a single-family structure.
Yes.
That's what it was, single-family residence. And if the topography or other site considerations didn't exist, in other words, if the site were to be suitable for multifamily dwelling units under the new zoning, it could be problematic if the applicant wanted to simply go back to the original use, wouldn't it?
It could be.
Because we would really have to make the findings that would permit essentially the variance or allow us to permit the use now.
Well, a variance wouldn't be the term we would use. There is no such thing as a variance to a use.
Bad choice of terms.
Yeah, a variance to use would be a change of zoning. You'd actually change. I understand what
But
you're
for
trying
us
to say. A
grant the
development
permission
standard.
For us to say, yeah, that's going to be an okay use. We
Correct.
Really have. Okay, so now I really understand the significance of that.
Yeah, if this was a flat lot that was a half acre in size, without any topographical constraints, it could be difficult for this commission to make findings that the lot would not be able to accommodate multifamily uses.
Okay, and then I think you did cover this, but if at some point in the future somebody, either the owner or somebody in the future decided they wanted to go back and convert it to office, that's a use that's allowable in the zoning, but they would have to reapply and go through that process, and get the CUP and all that. But
Correct.
This action tonight does not prevent that from happening.
Correct, it does not.
All right, Thank you very much.
That brings a question to me. If the original CUP was either requested to be removed or by change of occupancy proceedings to remove it, what would it revert to? The prior conditions before the original?
No, it would stand alone as a new application.
I'm just curious about something. If this status or use weren't changed back, is it legal for someone to live in it the way it is now? And even though it's designated as office or whatever, could someone use it as a single-family dwelling?
It could after inspection by our building department to make sure that those provisions that are required under the building code are indeed there. So things such as, yeah, right, I'm getting help from director here. There are also living components that must be provided in any dwelling unit. You must have heating source. You have to have an area where food can be prepared. You have to have area for storage. You have to have a sleeping area. You've got to get egress out to, in the case of an emergency. So those types of things need to make sure that they're there. It is nearly 100% likely that they still exist because as I mentioned earlier, the conversion back in 1991 really didn't affect the exterior of the site other than the detached garage that was removed. Yes, there was some modification to the exterior to allow for disabled access, but that shouldn't substantially or should not have substantially altered the building to make it not livable. In fact, the property owner today is living on the premises.
I guess just to follow up, if this conversion is approved, won't that inspection process be undertaken anyway? To see that it has heating and sleeping and all those other things? I mean, so it's not really different.
If I understand your question, would an inspection, well, we are proposing a condition that would do just that if it's approved.
So, but you're saying that if they hadn't asked for this and wanted to live there, there would be an inspection process. So it seems like it's going to be the same either way.
No, if they had not requested this request tonight, they would be living in a dwelling unit or in a structure that was not legally established for residential uses.
Okay. I don't want to belabor this.
No, yeah, I don't either. A relatively simple item, but I was beginning to wonder why they even then needed to have this application. But if they just decided to live there and weren't using it as an office, they just...
It would violate the use that was granted for the site.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is a necessary step.
Yes, correct. It's paperwork.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, with that, we'll open the public hearing, and as the applicant, you say there's a representative here for the applicant? Yeah.
Mr. Repschlager, who actually works for the Community Foundation. They are the ones who sold the property to Mr. Sheehan.
Okay, fine. Would you like to add some information?
Hi, Rod Repschlager. I really don't have any additional comments other than what's already been presented. Just that, we're trying to move forward with the paper to convert the property and that. So, thank you.
Fine, thank you. Any questions? Okay. Seeing, is there anybody else who would like to speak to this item before we close the public hearing on this matter? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on this matter and bring it back to the commission for our discussion and action.
I'd be happy to move the recommendation unless commissioners want some more discussion.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and, with the matter before us this evening, move to the applicant's request to remove conditional use permit 1991-06 and 1991-11 with regards to the property at 3097 Cedar Ravine Road. Adopt the staff report as part of the public record. making the following findings of fact as stated in the record, but specifically noting that the parcel size and shape and topography and other factors preclude the reasonable feasibility of constructing multi-dwelling use on this parcel, so that the conversion to a single-family residence would be permitted under the zoning as exists, and to accept the conditions as stated 1 through 4 on page 7 of the staff report.
I'll second.
I was going to die for lack of a second. It was suspenseful.
We have a motion and a second. Any other comment from the commission? I'll call for the vote.
Commissioner Drobish?
Aye.
Commissioner Friend?
Aye.
Commissioner Lowry?
Aye.
Vice Chair Russell?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just a question for staff. I deliberately did not use the term revoke conditional use permit. What would be the correct terminology? I think I said remove. I don't even know precisely what I used in my motion, but I almost used revoke, decided not to. I'm not sure what the...
We debated that at staff level, and
Okay.
yes, revoke seems to be a very strong term.
Right.
We preferred to use the term that I used in the staff report was discontinue.
Oh, that's, yeah, that's a perfect word. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, moving on to item 7-2. This is the really exciting one. The zone change and miscellaneous text amendments to the City of Placerville zoning ordinance, and I believe Mr. Webb has the report on this.
Thank you very much, Chair Russell, Commissioners. The report you have before you tonight is kind of a culmination of a number of various, what I would call kind of omnibus zoning text amendments that we are proposing. In short, we tend to allow minor amendments like these to kind of pool up and then batch them together in one report like this, so that we make a little more efficient process out of it. The amendments that are before you are proposed to amend the zoning ordinance. There's a variety of different amendments that are in large part what we would refer to as kind of cleanup items, amending and reconciling some definitions within the zoning. For example, mobile home park definitions to have internal consistency through the zoning document. There is some typographical errors with regard to minimum parcel area in the slope range table within the zoning ordinance, for example, that leaves a little bit of ambiguity. For example, if someone is right on the 10% cusp, are they required to do A or B? So just providing a bit more clarity to that. But also on the cleanup side of things is the medical cannabis dispensary, removing some kind of leftover references that are lingering in the zoning ordinance there in the commercial and heavy commercial zones that still refer to dispensaries as a permitted use in those districts, where in November of 2011, the City Council adopted an ordinance citywide that prohibits medical marijuana dispensaries throughout the city. And so there's an inconsistency there between sections of the municipal code that this would clean up. And that was simply a function of those references being missed when the ordinance was adopted in 2011. There's some other elements to the amendment before you that clarify procedure. For example, conditional use permit and variance procedure, to clarify that when there's a public hearing before the Planning Commission on a CUP or variance request, and that when there's another application being processed with that concurrently, say a site plan review, for example, oftentimes will run concurrently with a conditional use permit, that the oh no, I'm sorry. let me rephrase on that example. But if there's a conditional use permit or variance that's being processed concurrently with an application that requires city council action, let's say a parcel map, for example, or a zoning amendment concurrently with a conditional use permit, then the entire application package would come before the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission would make a recommendation to that entire package to the City Council, and the City Council would in turn act on the entire proposal in its entirety. And so it just provides a bit of clarity, and that's practically speaking, that's how the process has worked, but this just provides a bit of clarity in the written process in the zoning document. There's some references in there as well to the department name, which was previously Community Development, since changed to Community Development Engineering, but now it is Development Services Department. So just making some internal changes there, references to the director positions, also with respect to the Public Works Department, which really no longer exists. That function has now been absorbed into the Community Services Department, and making some clarifications as to the functions and definitions between Public Works and the Engineering Division, City Engineer, et cetera. There's some two new definitions proposed to be added to the zoning, and that is for transitional and supportive housing in the definitions of such. Senate Bill 2 that was passed by the state in 2008 requires that that cities amend the local zoning regulations to allow for transitional housing and supportive housing as they're defined within the document in front of you as allowable uses in districts where similar housing types are already allowed. And so what this would do is incorporate those definitions into the zoning code, and therefore incorporated as permissible uses by reference in those residential districts. This would also be, and neglected to note this in the staff report, but this would also be consistent with our housing element and one of the implementation action items that's noted in our current housing element as well. Let's see. Finally, there's a zoning, two references to zoning classifications which no longer exist, districts that no longer exist. That is the CG, or that's commercial, general commercial designation, and the RT, which I believe is the residential tourism designation. Those have not been in the zoning ordinance for some time, so this would eliminate those outdated references. From the standpoint of environmental review, per CEQA, staff determined and recommends that the Planning Commission, in reference to the drafted ordinance, recommended to the council that the proposed amendments would be exempt under 15061B3 of the California Environmental Quality Act, under the general rule that the amendments proposed would not have the potential for causing a significant environmental impact. With that, the item before you is ultimately a legislative action, since it's an amendment of the city code. So therefore, the Planning Commission's role in this would be to hold a public hearing and receive any comment on the proposed changes, and then make a recommendation to the City Council. In this case, staff recommends the Commission recommended that the City Council approve the text amendments as proposed in the ordinance attached to your report. So, be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Questions from the commission?
So you're going to get a lot of rookie questions from me for the foreseeable future. 1036I, the underlined, trying to understand the sense of that sentence. Is that a conditional use permit of variance or a conditional use permit or variance in that line?
Should be or. Thank you.
My work here is done.
What do we do with that?
have a question on the table of percentages. If you go with the noted change from 0 to 10 and then 11 to 30, seems to me that's adding almost a percentage point to the first category. If you could go 0 to 10, maybe 0 to 10.0. And then the next category would be 10.0 plus to 30. On the 10.42 parcel area. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because it adds
I've got you. There's a
9/10
there's
to
a
that
1%
first category.
gap that's not defined in there. I understand.
So that same gap is just being shifted to a different point. Just thoughts on that?
You have more? Michael?
Mike, on 10-1-4 definitions, in supportive housing, and it reads, supportive housing means housing with no limit on length of stay that is occupied by the target population and that is linked, et cetera. It seems to me that that should say something like that is occupied by a target population or an identified target population. By just saying occupied by the target population without defining what the target, it kind of implies that the target population has been identified previously. See what I'm saying? So, and I'm not even sure what is, I guess it begs the question, what is the target population? It's almost like it's out of context, like there was something else, and my guess is that with regards to transitional housing and supportive housing, we are talking about a population, either the homeless or displaced or some other, there's some other term, but it seems to me it needs to be somehow incorporated and or referenced here. But just by saying occupied by the target population, it seems like it's just kind of hanging. Everything else looks pretty straightforward.
If that's all from the commission, we'll open the public hearing on these items. Is there anybody here that wishes to speak to the changes? Are you sure you got the word out on this? I would expect it a standing room only audience. If there's no public to speak, we'll close the hearing and bring it back to the commission.
Well, I guess the question is, assuming we move to recommend that the council adopt the proposed text amendments, we won't know exactly what the changes are that you'll present to council, right? It's not going to come back to us, obviously. So you don't have any idea about what you might write with regards to the comments that we offer?
Well, it depends upon the I guess specificity of the commission's action tonight.
Okay.
You can be as specific as you want with respect to your recommendations and recommended adjustments that you would want to see incorporated before it's presented to the council, for example. Yeah. And I've taken notes on the comments presented to date. Quite honestly, I think they all make sense as far as further clarifications. Okay. So, yeah. And certainly, if the commission wanted to, we could forward the the council staff report to you, or you can obviously reference that online as well prior to it going forward to the council, which we would expect. If recommendation for approval is made tonight, then it may be the second meeting in May at the earliest when it would go to council. So May 28th.
The end of the month. 2 weeks, yeah, okay,
At the earliest, if not in June.
okay. I'm
Okay,
comfortable
it's
with
my feeling that your question pertaining to the percentages, I think, was received and understood. Your word change was, and are you comfortable with?
Yeah,
Okay.
mine I think was a little bit more obtuse perhaps, but
Okay.
yeah, I'm not concerned.
Well, I personally don't think it's necessary to come back to us for any particular reason, if these comments were received and understood and everything, so perhaps someone could move and
Did I come across clear what I was saying about, say, 0 to equal to or less than 10%, greater than 10% to equal than or less than 30?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, exactly.
So there's
Understood.
clear break-off points.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
There's no ambiguity in the fractions between 10 and 11, for example, right?
Well, actually, and it's very, just now looking at it, it says amendment would change the slope ranges so they are exclusive, 0 to 10, and then 11%. Are you concerned about the 1% between the 10 and the 11? So, gotcha.
okay. I thought that was understood.
Yeah.
So, okay. We'll entertain a motion if someone would like to do so.
I'll yield.
Don't put this on me, okay. First motion, I guess, here. Recommend forwarding to the city council staff's listed items of correction to the draft zoning ordinance amendments with staff report as part of the record. Are there findings in here?
They're incorporated as part of the ordinance itself are the whereas statements
Okay.
and the findings in the CEQA determination as well. So those would be incorporated by reference.
With the clarification language on the table percentages and the language mentioned by, what was it under? The suggested language change under the transitional housing, supportive housing, if allowed by state law, because I believe that was a direct copy of state law. Is that complete, or do I need to finish more?
And Commissioner Lowry's suggested change.
Yeah, under 10-3-6I,
6I,
conditional use permit
change of
or
language.
variance.
For variance.
Significant edit. I'll second the motion.
Good. We have a motion and a second. Any more comment?
The motion was sufficient for staff?
Yes, thank you.
Good.
Good.
A roll call vote.
Commissioner Drobish,
Aye.
Commissioner Friend.
Aye.
Commissioner Lowry,
Aye.
Vice Chair Russell.
Aye.
Thank you.
Mike's a full-fledged commissioner now. He made his first motion.
I will, just as a little, a very brief sidebar, I would like to note too, bring to the commission's attention that just yesterday, if you hadn't already heard, the California Supreme Court had made a ruling regarding local jurisdictions' ability to regulate medical marijuana dispensaries, and moreover to prohibit them if local jurisdiction finds that prudent. So I just, as a bit of a sidebar, bring that to the commission's attention, and we can provide you additional information on that if you like, and by way of the court written court record, if you like. So.
I did hear Sacramento's Board of Supervisor was on the radio, was interviewed on the radio on exactly that. So it gives the flexibility, right, for cities that choose to can, those that don't. It's clearly within their jurisdiction to decide which way they want to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was an article in the Sacramento Bee tonight also about that, so it's okay. Moving on to item 7.3, general plan amendment, zone change, Placerville Airport land use compatibility plan implementation. And is this back to Andrew?
That would be me, yes. Thank you. This project, again, as you mentioned, would be a request to amend the general plan, file number 2013-02, zoning ordinance amendment, or zoning ordinance amendment, yes, 2013-01. The request tonight is for the Planning Commission to recommend to City Council to adopt a resolution amending the text of the general plan of the City of Placerville to bring that plan into consistency with the airport land use compatibility plan, or what I will now call in my oral report the ALUCP, that was prepared and adopted by the El Dorado Airport Land Use Commission, which I will now reference as the ALUC, back in June of last year. And this is required under Government Code 65302.3. Also, the Commission is asked to offer a recommendation to City Council regarding the ordinance, a new ordinance, which would be added to the zoning code under Section 23, a new designation, abbreviation is AO, or Airport Overlay. That would be added to Title 10, Chapter 5. Other amendments include the amending Section 1 of Chapter 5 by adding that AO, or Airport Overlay Zone designation, to the list of other zoning designations the city currently has. Also to delete Section 8, which is the airport approaches section of the zoning ordinance. That's in Title 10 of Chapter 4, and staff is proposing to remove that in its entirety, and I will briefly cover why that would be necessary in a moment. A third request would be to amend the Placerville zoning map. This would involve adding the new AO designation, or Airport Overlay Zone. The boundary of that zone includes all the land located within the city that is also within the Placerville Airport influence area. Now, behind you on the wall is a graphic of that particular area. The yellow, I guess it's more of a green tinge on that map behind you is the airport property proper, and the airport influence area is shown. That's kind of difficult to see from here, but there is an arc that goes completely around the airport, and the airport influence area is defined in the ALUCP, as well as city staff is recommending that the city adopt those terms as well, as I will discuss briefly. But in the airport influence area is defined in the ALUCP as an area in which current or future airport-related noise, overflight, safety, or airspace protection factors may significantly affect land uses or necessitate restrictions on those uses. The airport influence area constitutes the area within which certain land use actions are subject to ALUC review to determine consistency within the airport land use plan policies. As I mentioned, this project is really before you and is city's attempt to bring the city's general plan and zoning ordinance into consistency with the airport land use compatibility plan. That plan was adopted last year by the ALUC staff, by ALUC back in June of last year. An environmental document was processed when that project went before the ALUC. It went through its public hearing and circulation for public comment. I'll also remark that this particular body did have a joint meeting with the City Council to discuss the draft ALUCP that occurred back, well, almost exactly 1 year ago in this building. Representatives of from ALUC staff, Mr. Deloria, who's in the audience this evening, was present, as well as the consultants that assisted in the development of that plan from Mead and Hunt. They were here to answer questions. I believe 3 of the members of the Planning Commission were in attendance at that particular meeting. The proposed amendments tonight are required under government code, and the commission's role tonight is very similar. Well, it's the same as what the director mentioned in the previous item, that you are advisory to the City Council for tonight's request. You're advised to conduct a public hearing to hear public comment, consider those comments, and forward a recommendation to City Council regarding the proposed activities and proposed project items on the agenda tonight. Specifically, the general plan amendments involve 3 sections of the general plan. Section 1, the land use element; Section 3, the transportation section; and Section 6, the health and safety section. Staff is recommending some goals and policies that address specifically the ALUCP and as it relates to existing and future land use compatibility within the airport proximity. Additional amendments involve the adoption by reference of the glossary of terms, the table of contents, and chapters 2, 3, 4, 6, and 9 of the Placerville ALUCP, which contains the compatibility policies. Also, as I mentioned briefly earlier, an amendment to the zoning code is proposed, the addition of Section 22, the airport overlay zone. And the purpose of this is to provide a mechanism that is to be used to review land use development for consistency with the ALUCP. That ordinance section specifies the procedural process that would be followed for projects that are within that overlay zone. It specifies specific policies and criteria that refer the user, be it the Planning Commission, be it City Council, be it the public, be it city staff, when evaluating a development project, and would refer the reader back to specific policies within the ALUCP, again, as proposed to be adopted by reference into our general plan. The other amendments, as I mentioned, to add the AO designation and to remove in its entirety the airport approaches section. I'll briefly discuss that. The provisions and policies within the ALUCP discuss airport approaches and takeoffs. It is not necessary to have perhaps repetitive or even conflicting language in our zoning ordinance. So therefore, staff is recommending that that section be deleted in its entirety. And the third would involve the addition of the AO zone to be an amended portion of our Placerville zoning map. Again, that to coincide with those areas that are within the airport influence area and also within the city limits of Placerville. In terms of the environmental document for this request this evening, it is staff's determination that the analysis was done under the ALUCP project. That environmental document is sufficient to be used in this case as the analysis for potential impacts, even regarding potential amendments by both the county and city to their respective general plans, were analyzed in that document and with no impacts to the environment identified. Public notice for this project, as Ms. Interlead explained, was in a display advertisement that covered about what was approximately a third of the page. And that was posted and published in the Mountain Democrat on April 22nd. Also, the city provided it availability to view it on April 25th. And also, we mailed notice to those who request receiving Planning Commission meeting items were mailed to them. And as of this moment, no public comment has been received. Now, prior to Planning Commission, the City Council taking any action on this item, Mr. Deloria will present the city's intended amendments to the ALUC for a determination that those amendments are consistent with the ALUCP. That is required under state statute, and it is likely, I believe, potentially scheduled for the ALUC's June 6th of 2013 meeting. So therefore, City Council would not likely hear the recommendations this evening by the Planning Commission until sometime after that, likely June 25th. In terms of the recommendation tonight, I do have one amendment for your consideration this evening before I go through those, that summary. I want to refer you, the Planning Commission, to page 4 under, should be Roman numeral 3, not Roman numeral 2, where it says adopt the following. That should say Roman numeral 3. And also I want to make amendments to number 2 of Roman numeral 3 to read as follows. An ordinance amending the text of the City of Placerville zoning ordinance and the zoning map, comma, with the language and figure as set forth in full in Exhibit C, period. It's staff's recommendation that the Planning Commission conduct a public hearing tonight, hear from the public before rendering a recommendation to staff so that we will forward on to City Council. Staff has some recommended findings that we are requesting that the City Council make. They are on page 3. On page 4, related to the amendment and the zone change, there are findings A and B, as well as the amended adoption language I just referred to under Roman numeral 3.2. Staff is asking the Planning Commission for a positive recommendation to adopt the resolution involving the general plan amendments and adopt an ordinance amending the city zoning ordinance. That concludes my staff report. We do have some supplemental information regarding the ALUCP if that's of interest tonight. Also, as I mentioned, Mr. Deloria, who is the senior he's a senior transportation plan, thank you, of the ALUC, who's here tonight also. That concludes my staff report.
Thank you. Any questions, comments?
I'll yield to Mr.
Perhaps a preemptive question. Is the Planning Commission tonight to only make recommendations to City Council and to not be making the findings and such?
Yes, you're requested to make recommendation, yes.
So the only thing that I'm slightly confused about in this whole presentation is at the very, very last page, we have section 10-4-8 zoning section, I believe, right? Everything is struck out.
The airport approaches should be deleted in its entirety.
Okay, and not replaced with anything.
No.
Okay,
Those
because
provisions.
The negative declaration takes care of all of that? Is that
The airport approaches is a component of the ALUCP.
okay.
So
no,
there are
it's no
policies
longer
that-
separate.
Yeah.
Okay. The ALUCP
Staff-
now becomes the overarching document of authority,
Correct.
essentially. Okay, I'm good with that.
Very good. If there's nothing else, we'll open the public hearing, and I believe you're up.
I don't have any specific comments, Commissioners. Good evening, but I am here to answer any questions if you have them, And just also thank Andrew and the planning staff at the city for the great work we've done with them. It's been a collaborative effort over about a year and a half now. It's been a pleasure, and the commission staff will be taking the recommendation to the Airport Land Use Commission in June for consistency based on the amendments before you. So,
Okay. Any questions of? Any other comments from anybody concerning this item or matter? If not, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission.
I'll go. Upon reading this, I had concerns, but I've asked a lot of questions, and I'm feeling a little more calmed about the potential of taking a private property without compensation, but there is a process for people to appeal and go through it if they really feel that they want to build something right at the end of the runway or in a dangerous area. So, and just correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. The impacted private property parcels is very limited, but a major portion of the city will need to do some or all of the following: a recorded overflight notification, which is it's recorded on the title, a real estate transaction notice, sellers and agents responsible for, and then navigation easements, which will be some of the primary affected parcels. So will these people, I imagine notice has gone out to realtors and such that this kind of information now going forward needs to be part of the property so that people are openly informed. Existing land uses are protected. Future land uses may be restricted depending on location and desired use. And then with the city adopting this in whole, the airport land use compatibility plan, the decision-making will stay with the city and not involve the El Dorado County Airport Land Use Commission. Is that correct?
It's partially correct. There are certain major land use actions that are required under the ALUCP to go before the ALUC for their consistency review. One of them is an example of what was presented earlier, changes to the zoning ordinance. Those potentially could affect land uses and the regulations for land uses within the influence area, or a general plan amendment. The ALUC wants the ability to review those potential changes in policy related to the airport, as well as land use in the vicinity. And I don't want to speak for Woody, but potentially those are two examples of project potentials that would go before them for their review. But you're partially correct, Member Drobish, regarding the general run-of-the-mill projects, site plan reviews, conditional use permits to some extent. Those the determinations would be made by the city, be it staff level if it was for a ministerial project, or if it would involve a discretionary review by the planning commission, then maybe the planning commission would serve as the determination body as to compatibility. And if it involved a council action, then they would serve as that review body. Perhaps Mr. Deloria would clarify.
I think it's also important to note that the Airport Land Use Commission has no land use authority over the jurisdiction. They would ultimately, in the case of a major land use action that Andrew mentioned, the Airport Land Use Commission makes a recommendation to the City Council for that land use authority.
So what I take away from this is that this overlay zoning is probably going forward being an element of disclosure in real estate transactions, probably.
Well, yes, it's also a mechanism or a tool, as I mentioned earlier in my report, that would trigger someone to, oh, there's an extra amount of evaluation that needs to be done because of its proximity to the runway and the activities that go on at the airport. And having that designation would trigger the reader, the user, the decision maker, if it was you or you all or city council, to note that there's something more than just the underlying zoning involved here. There are some other policies that also need to be examined before the city can approve a development project, future development project. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I guess the follow-up for me is the evaluation, it seems to me like, as a practical matter, would be about whether any proposed development would penetrate the abrogation easements. And the abrogation easements really come down from the federal aviation regulations to Caltrans, to El Dorado County, to the municipalities.
That's partially correct. The abrogation easements only apply to those parcels which are within the high noise and risk areas, which is different than the 1987 airport land use compatibility plans, which applied to abrogation easements across the entire influence area. Really, I think what we're looking at is are those areas that are within the safety, the noise, the overflight areas of the airport land use compatibility plan. You know, so if you're thinking of things penetrating those kind of imaginary surfaces, that's what we're looking at, and then also the safety zones around the runway, the noise contours, things of that nature.
Yeah, a good example, and I've used this with another person who asked about that question. For instance, if there was a project, a ham radio purveyor in an owned property near the airport, and he or she wanted to erect a tower that was 100 feet in the air, just call it 100 feet. Well, that 100 feet would need to be analyzed to make sure it doesn't penetrate the surface that we want to make sure is unobstructed, so that airplanes can have free movement around the airport as they would expect to receive. That particular type of request would be, in and of itself, is a conditional use in the city, but because of if it was located within the influence area, the city would also be analyzing it for consistency with the policies in the ALUCP. To give you an idea how we would process that.
Mr. Chair, question. So you mentioned, so we have an airport influence area, and it's indicated on the map, what's in our package, but not all the parcels in there, and it says in the staff report or in the agenda, there are over 1,000 parcels subject to the proposed AO zone. Okay, that's what it says. But not all of those parcels fall within the areas of concern either because of noise or safety, right?
Correct.
It would have been nice to have seen that as a graphic on the map so that you could, because I imagine it's kind of like a balloon shape or some other kind of elliptical sort of.
We actually, if I can interrupt, we actually have those. They are graphics or exhibits that are part of the ALUCP. I did bring them tonight with not expecting to show them, but if that is something you want to look at, we can certainly put them on the wall.
No,
But we do have separate graphics for that particular purpose.
So I'll just make a suggestion to staff that when this finally goes to council, and perhaps for the public's benefit as well, that you can see, even though that there's a lot of parcels that are covered by the zone, there's a relatively small percentage. I'm presuming it's a small percentage, either by number of parcels and or by actual surface area acreage that fall into that category, and you'd be able to see that. So
I think it would be fair to say that the preponderance of the 1,200 parcels or so would be in what's called the overflight area. As you get closer to the runway, that is where more policies are involved in terms of overflight, noise.
Right, stands to reason.
Correct,
I mean, that
yeah.
makes perfect sense. I think probably just be good to see that.
Just for reference, I can't offhand tell you exactly how many parcels are within the safety zones, but as part of the environmental document, we looked at all of those parcels that could be impacted by the airport land use compatibility plan policies that were not consistent with the general plan. And there's only one parcel in the city limits where there was a potential issue, and the slope, the topography is such that it's unbuildable as it is anyway, so.
I kind of remember that from the presentation,
Right.
However many moons ago that was,
Right.
so.
A year ago.
Anyway, just a suggestion, I have no issues with this.
Did you have something?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I think we can proceed.
Have we officially closed the public hearing?
Yeah, I thought we had.
Not
did.
sure. Okay,
And this was a sort of
little extra.
a little extra.
Okay.
But we did close the public hearing, you know. With that, is someone prepared to move on this?
I'll jump on this one again.
Oh,
Okay. I make a motion that the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council that they take the following actions. Make findings regarding the negative declaration adopted June 28, 2012 by the El Dorado County ALUC for the Placerville Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan, letters A through C. That the City Council make the following findings regarding the General Plan Amendment 2013-02 and Zone Change ZC 2013-01, A through B. Number 3, the City Council adopt the following: a resolution for Section 1, Land Use, Section 3, Transportation, Section 4, Health and Safety of the City of Placerville's General Plan, and 2, an ordinance amending the text of the City of Placerville zoning ordinance with a zoning map with the language as set forth full in Exhibit C, and that the resolution also reflects the Exhibit B.
Second that motion, and a friendly amendment that we adopt the staff report and incorporate as part of the public record.
I'll make that amendment.
We have a motion and a second. Any more comments? If not, we'll have the roll call.
Commissioner Drobish,
Aye.
Commissioner Friend,
Aye.
Commissioner Lowry,
Aye.
Vice Chair Russell.
Aye.
Thank you.
Some of us can run a really efficient meeting, you know. It's
You know,
not
I'm taking notes, I'm being schooled.
a question for staff, would you like these back if we didn't want to keep this particular item?
Well, yes and no. Yes, we would like them back, but there's a possibility, Vice Chair Russell, that we could have a project that you might want to reference that in the near future, to have that. It's entirely up to you.
Okay.
Okay.
Your bookshelf, not theirs.
Okay. Yes, thank you. And I've lost my agenda here, so are there any,
We're on item 8, which is discussion items. We
discussion,
had
that's what I was
none
looking for.
scheduled for tonight.
no discussion items?
No.
Any matters from, did you have something, Andrew? No?
No, not discussion items, no.
Okay. Anything from this commission?
Well, you might be thinking about item 9, matters from staff and commissioners. There may be some items from staff.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. Very ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, as you know, this is Mike's last week with the city. If you weren't aware of that, you are now. We weren't planning any formal, going away. He just hasn't been here long enough for us to do that, so we won't. But this would be an opportune time for you, if you wanted to put something on the record regarding Mr. Webb and what he's done for us, and we would certainly miss him. going forward. And I also do have some additional items as well, but I will conclude soon.
I would just like to thank Mike for his guidance and advice, and just tell you that I wish you all the best in your endeavors, and I, for one, will miss your input and miss your presence.
Yeah, I'll second that. I think we'll miss you, Mike. It's our loss.
Here, here. Been very professional, and your personality is just perfect. You have the answers, you're calm. It's just been fantastic. And full disclosure, I did give you a coffee mug from Hangtown Hardware. It was probably worth $12, $13, $14, so full disclosure.
Probably won't have to report that.
And I've been using it quite a bit for lately.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Is Steve Calfee coming out of retirement?
I don't expect so. No, I very much appreciate the comments from the commissioners, and it's really been my pleasure to serve you in the city of Placerville for the time that I have. I think we've got a great commission here. I certainly appreciate all of your involvement in the community and service on the commission. You know, more to come in terms of my successor. You know, I'm sure that the city manager, when the time is appropriate, will announce, you know, his plans for the position. And in the meantime, you're in very good hands with Andrew and Erica as staff, you know, representatives for your questions or any concerns that come up. You know, my hat's off to them. They do a tremendous job for the city. So thank you again.
Okay. You had some more items, Andrew?
Yes, I do. To give you an idea of what's coming up in the next, the May 21st meeting, we do have one particular item for certain, and it would be an amendment to the development plan for the plan development overlay for the Rigid Orchard Hills. The property owners want to request the allowance to provide a one-car garage option. Their current development plan requires a two-car garage provision with each single-family residence constructed. A second item is potentially in the works involving entitlement extension, automatic extensions for entitlements that have shelf life or they have not expired yet. It is potential that a request for a zone ordinance amendment may come as early as that meeting. We may have more information as early as tomorrow. The third item is a rather exciting one, I think. You guys have read in the Mountain Democrat about the Fountain and Tallman folks at the Heritage group there on Main Street. They are operating tours of historic downtown Placerville. And last week I put in a request that the Planning Commission, that we have a tour not only for the commission at the next meeting. Tour will last about an hour and 20 minutes to an hour 30 minutes. I believe we can, if we meet at 6, we can get the other items between 6 and 7 handled. And I have not heard confirmation back from Marilyn Ferguson with the museum yet. She has not confirmed that date, but we hope to get that confirmation soon so we can put that on the agenda. I think you guys will enjoy that, so bring your walking shoes for that item. And also, Member Drobish brought to the Commission's attention, I believe it was the last meeting, this document regarding wood window replacement and window energy analysis. I want to give Mr. Drobish, the Member Drobish, an opportunity to really fully present this. He submitted this just prior to the action item for the project on Sacramento Street, and we hope to have some time, if it's of the interest of the rest of the commission, to have Mr. Drobish present this in a more formal manner than it previously received. Procedurally, as we mentioned earlier, some of the items tonight that the Planning Commission reviewed will have City Council action on soon. And so it's customary, as you know, to have a member of the Planning Commission present at those meetings. If that can be resolved tonight, that would be great. I understand fully that we don't necessarily have a date potentially for both items. I think we're kind of looking at the June 25th council meeting for the general plan amendment zone change project application. But the omnibus, as Director Webb mentioned, that item could go as early as 2 weeks from tonight, 3 weeks from tonight. So I'll leave that up to the commission for advice. That's all I have.
If I might also add to that, with respect to the omnibus zoning amendments, you know, given the fairly routine nature of the majority of that, if the commission, I think, wanted to opt to or elect to not necessarily have a representative go to that council meeting, I think it would be understood. If it's not something that would be readily available for someone's calendar. So, for what it. Yeah.
Great.
So, Andrew, a couple of things. I want to understand this often abused word entitlement in context of how you use it here. Does this refer to some sort of grandfathering of use, or?
No, it has to do with projects that have been approved, either by council action, planning commission action, and they have either, because of the economy, perhaps have not been built, or financial sources have not been obtained to construct. And so it is strictly those that are currently in the pipeline, so to speak, but have not formally been constructed. And, or maybe they're partially constructed or in the process of being such, and that mechanism, an automatic extension, although it has not been determined what classification of projects would qualify for that, but we are still internally reviewing that. But that is what's meant by entitlement in terms of this context.
Right. In short, it's those projects that have planning approval, either by way of staff approval, but in most instances, I think it's by way of either planning commission and/or city council approval of their planning application.
And the city does have a table showing that, right? The hotels and the residential that have been entitled that can be extended and such.
Those are potential categories of projects that could fall under this entitlement extension, yes.
And then kudos for the historical tour that the group puts on down there. It's free, a recommended donation. And I think this is going to become big. It was beautiful to watch 40-something people just walking down the street together, learning about our history.
Great point. In fact, it's open. Anybody who attends the next meeting would also be able to go on that tour as well. So we're not precluding anybody from doing so. And in fact, we've got Mr. Morris in the audience who was there when I approached Marilyn Ferguson regarding the request, and we hope to get a response back to from her soon so that we can certainly put that on the agenda. But that's what we're hoping for is the next meeting. So certainly bring your tennis shoes.
So given that we're going to hear an amendment to a PDO, and then we're also going to consider entitlement extensions, I think it mandates then that Chairman Russell to actually chair the meeting to keep us on a tight ship, because we have 1 hour or so to dispense with those items to then go on the walking tour. So you'll have a second opportunity to run a tight meeting, Mr. Chairman.
Not if the chairman is here. With that, the meeting is adjourned to the May 21st.
So moved. Well done, sir.